March 1952, the Moffat Tunnel, Colorado. 6 miles of railroad track bored through the Continental Divide at an elevation of 9,000 feet. The Denver and Rio Grande Western locomotive number 1503 entered the west portal of the Moffat Tunnel at 11:47 in the morning, pulling 9 passenger cars and a mail car with 212 people aboard. The engineer's name was Carl Becker. He had run this route for 11 years, knew every grade and curve of it, knew the tunnel the way a man knows a road he has driven in the dark enough times that the dark is no longer a problem. He was 53 years old, a solid man who had never missed a shift and whose record at the Denver and Rio Grande Western was the kind of record that gets mentioned at retirement dinners. At 11:49, 2 minutes into the tunnel, Carl Becker lost consciousness. He did not know it was coming. His heart had been giving him signals for 3 months that he had been interpreting as indigestion, because the alternative interpretation was one that would end his career, and he was not ready for his career to end. The signals had been wrong about what they were. The heart was not wrong about what it needed. He went down between the throttle and the brake, a large man in a small space, the locomotive running at 45 miles per hour through the mountain. The fireman on the other side of the cab turning to say something and finding the engineer on the floor. The fireman's name was Pete Navarro. He was 26 years old and had been a fireman for 14 months. He had never driven a locomotive. Roy Rogers is in car 4. He is not performing, not traveling for work, not doing the kind of thing that Roy Rogers usually has a reason for. He is going to Denver because his accountant has been asking him to come to Denver for 2 months, and he has been finding reasons not to, and has run out of reasons. He booked the train because he likes trains the way he likes most things that move slowly enough to see the country from. He has a window seat on the left side of car 4, the mountains visible through the glass until the tunnel swallowed them. Now there is nothing outside the window but the tunnel wall moving past in the lamplight, the rock close enough to touch if the window were open, which it is not. He is reading a newspaper. He notices, at 12 minutes past entering the tunnel, that the train has not slowed for the midpoint grade check that it always makes in the Moffat Tunnel. He has ridden this route 4 times. The midpoint grade check is a standard procedure. The engineer eases the throttle at the midpoint to manage the grade coming out the east side. It has happened every time he has ridden this route. It has not happened this time. Roy Rogers sets the newspaper down. He looks at the window. The tunnel wall is moving past faster than it should be. He gets up. He moves forward through the cars. Through car 3, through car 2, through car 1, through the vestibule connection to the mail car, through the mail car, through the second vestibule. He moves at a pace that does not alarm the passengers he passes, because alarming passengers is not useful, and because he does not yet know enough to be alarmed himself. He moves at the pace of a man going to find out something. The locomotive cab door is latched from inside. Roy Rogers knocks twice, hard. Nothing. He knocks again, 5 times, louder. The door opens. Pete Navarro is on the other side, his face the face of a 26-year-old who has been alone in a locomotive cab for 6 minutes with a man on the floor and a tunnel around him and no idea what to do. He says, "The engineer went down. I don't know how to." Roy Rogers steps into the cab. Carl Becker is on the floor between the throttle and the brake lever, breathing, unconscious, his color not good. Roy Rogers crouches beside him for 5 seconds, pulse, breathing, color, and stands back up. He says to Pete Navarro, "Is he breathing?" Pete says, "Yes, sir." Roy Rogers looks at the instrument panel. The speedometer reads 52 miles per hour. The grade indicator shows they are on the downslope toward the east portal. The throttle is at the position Carl Becker left it when he went down. which is a position appropriate for the level section inside the tunnel, and not for the downslope that leads to the portal, and not for whatever is outside the tunnel on the east side. Roy Rogers grew up 12 miles from a railroad line. His father worked section crew in the summers when the farm needed the money, and Roy had been on locomotives a dozen times as a boy, sitting in the cab with the engineer the way boys sat in locomotive cabs in the 1920s when the railroad men still let them. He had never driven one. He had watched enough men drive them that he knew what the instruments meant and what the levers did. Knowing what something means and knowing how to do it are not the same thing. He puts his hands on the brake lever anyway. He does not brake hard. This is the important thing, and he knows it because he has been in the cab enough times as a boy to hear the engineers talk about it. You do not brake hard on a downgrade in a tunnel. A hard brake on a downgrade with 9 cars behind you produces a chain reaction through the couplings that can put a car off the track. The brake is applied gradually, with attention to the grade indicator and the speedometer and the feel of the train through the lever, which is a feel that Roy Rogers does not have because he has never operated this lever before. He applies it as gradually as he can. The speedometer reads 52, then 50, then 48. The tunnel is going to end. He does not know what is on the other side. Pete Navarro knows the route. Roy Rogers looks at him and says, "East portal. What's the first curve?" Pete says, "Right curve, 200 yards out. Then straight to the Tolland station, 1.5 miles." Roy Rogers says, "Is there anything on the track between here and Tolland?" Pete says, "There shouldn't be. The schedule has us clear." Roy Rogers says, "Shouldn't be or isn't?" Pete is quiet for half a second. He says, "Isn't. The schedule is clear. I checked it this morning." Roy Rogers nods. He looks at Carl Becker on the floor. He looks at the speedometer. He looks at the tunnel ahead. He says, "Carl Becker ran this route for 11 years. He knew this tunnel. He knew this grade. He did not set the throttle wrong when he went down. He set it for the level section, which is where he was when he went down. That bought us time. We're going to use it." The speedometer reads 44. The light at the end of the tunnel is visible now, a white rectangle growing larger, the gray Colorado sky beyond it, the mountains. He says to Pete, "Get on the radio to Tolland. Tell them we're coming in hot and the engineer is down and to have medical standing by. Tell them we're slowing but not stopped. Tell them to clear the platform." Pete gets on the radio. His voice is steadier than Roy Rogers expected it to be, which tells him something about Pete Navarro that will be confirmed by the man's 22-year career as an engineer on this same line. Roy Rogers watches the speedometer and watches the tunnel end and applies the brake in the way that he hopes is the right way, which is the gradual way, which is the way the engineers he watched as a boy applied it on the grades. The speedometer drops, 42, 40, 38. The train does not shudder. The 9 cars behind him continue on the track without complaint. They come out of the Moffat tunnel at 34 miles per hour. The right curve is exactly where Pete said it would be. Roy Rogers takes it. The Colorado mountains open up on all sides as the tunnel releases them. Granite and pine and the particular gray of a March sky over the Front Range. And Roy Rogers does not look at the mountains because he is watching the track and the speedometer and the distance to the Tolland platform. But he is aware of them the way he is always aware of open country when it arrives after confinement. The platform comes into view. The 2 men with the stretcher, the nurse, the cleared platform. Roy Rogers applies the brake. The Tolland station platform is clear when the Denver and Rio Grande Western number 1503 comes in. 2 men from the station crew are standing at the far end with a stretcher. A woman who turns out to be a nurse is standing beside them. The platform is clear of passengers, which means someone made the right call on the radio in the 2 minutes between Pete's transmission and the train's arrival. Roy Rogers brings the train to a stop. It takes longer than it would take Carl Becker to stop it, because Roy Rogers does not have Carl Becker's 11 years of feel for this particular locomotive on this particular track. But it stops. The train stops at the Tolland platform at 12:16 in the afternoon, 3 minutes and 29 seconds after Carl Becker went down. The station crew boards immediately and goes to the cab. Roy Rogers steps back from the controls and lets them. He helps lift Carl Becker onto the stretcher, which requires 4 people because Carl Becker is a large man and the cab is a small space. Carl Becker is taken off the train. He does not regain consciousness until the following morning in a hospital in Denver, where a doctor tells him that what he had been interpreting as indigestion for 3 months was his heart giving him information about its condition, and that he had used up most of the latitude available to him. He retires from the Denver and Rio Grande Western in April of 1952. He lives until 1971. The passengers do not know what happened. They know the train stopped at Tolland, which is not a scheduled stop. They know the engineer was taken off on a stretcher. They know they were delayed by 40 minutes while a replacement engineer was brought from Denver to complete the run. Most of them sit in their cars and read newspapers and look out the window at the Colorado mountains and wait for the train to move. A few of them, in car 4, notice that the seat by the left window is empty. The man who was sitting there, tall, familiar face, they can't quite place it, is not there when the train starts moving again. He is in the station at Tolland, drinking coffee with Pete Navarro. Pete Navarro says, "How did you know how to do that?" Roy Rogers says, "I watched a lot of men do it when I was a boy." Pete says, "That's all?" Roy Rogers drinks his coffee. He says, "That, and I did not do it wrong." Pete Navarro is quiet for a moment. He says, "Mr. Rogers, I want you to know that when I opened that door and saw you standing there, I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was imagining things." Roy Rogers says, "Were you?" Pete says, "No, sir." Roy Rogers says, "Then it worked out." He finishes the coffee. He shakes Pete Navarro's hand. He gets back on the train when the replacement engineer arrives because he still needs to get to Denver, and his accountant has been waiting 2 months already and can wait a bit longer but not indefinitely. The train arrives in Denver at 2:41 in the afternoon, 1 hour and 4 minutes behind schedule. Roy Rogers' accountant does not ask what happened. Roy Rogers does not explain. They discuss the accounts. Pete Navarro completed his fireman certification in 1953 and was promoted to engineer in 1955. He ran the Moffat tunnel route for 22 years. He retired in 1977 and moved to Pueblo, where his daughter lived. He told the story of the Moffat tunnel to his grandchildren when they were old enough to sit still for it. He told it the same way every time. The engineer down, the cab door, the tall man, the brake applied gradually, the curve at the east portal taken at 34 miles per hour. He always ended it the same way. He said, "I asked him how he knew what to do. He said he watched a lot of men do it when he was a boy. He said, 'I have thought about that answer for 25 years. He said, "I think what he meant was, you learn things by watching people who know what they are doing. And then one day you need what you learned. And either you learned it right or you didn't." He said, "He learned it right." If this story reached you, drop your state in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't. A new King of the Cowboys story every day, because they still make men like him. You just have to know where to look.